Alright, so in this video, I want to do a plot outline. We've had enough filming happen. I've collected enough leaks from people who send me DMs over on Twitter. Go follow me at @Sir_Hunts, please. Also, follow me on Instagram at @Sir_Hunts_reviews. Instagram is more for fun, right? So I try to be as funny as possible. And then on Twitter, I try to be informative. So I'll retweet rather, and like things that I either make a video on or already have, or just stuff that I'm interested in. So please go follow me on those two social media platforms that are linked down below in the description. And then also, it's the most important thing, subscribe! Please, subscribe to me here on YouTube and then slap a like on this video. Like goes gonna be 420. You get it? Special shout out to every single member of my executive producer tier over on Patreon. They are Tyler Schnabel, the North Mushroom member, my girl Breanne Johnson, and Destiny Phillips 420. Thank you all for watching. Okay, so in the first episode of House of the Dragon, Season 2, right, remember there's only 8 episodes this season, they cut 2, and Season 3 might even be shortened 8 episodes as well, but here's the thing, it's not like with Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones, they had no business cutting episodes, and not giving us an extra season because there was so much book material. But for this series, it actually makes more sense to showcase the most important moments, and you're not really cutting out anything aside from a few, characters. Anyway, let's get right into it, right? So, 8 episodes is not a bad thing for this show, is what I'm trying to get at. In the very first episode, Rhaenyra will fly to Shipbreaker Bay. She will mourn for Luke, and in this scene, we will look at Rhaenyra in a whole new light, supposedly. Also in episode 1, Daemon hatches a plan and for revenge of what happened to Luke, and then he ends up leaving for Harrenhal by the end of the episode, and then they show that he takes the castle. He's injured while doing so, and this injury leaves him out for a few episodes. He only has a few scenes before later on in the season where he plays a major role. And then in episode 2, this person mentions that it will start with the intro to Blood and Cheese, like an introduction to these two characters, Blood and this other character, Cheese. And it's all going to be through Mysaria. Like, Mysaria will be the person who introduce us, the show watchers, to these characters on screen. It's going to be her trying to find them through the city. They mentioned that most of the time in episode 2 is spent building up to the death of Jaehaerys, right? Blood and Cheese. And then we will catch a glimpse of Jacaerys arriving in the Vale. And then the last thing that will happen in this episode, aside from the death of Jaehaerys and the Blood and Cheese scene, will be Daeron the Daring. And this is supposed to be like a lighthearted moment because the episode is so dark. But Daeron the Daring, it's before he becomes the Daring, arrives in King's Landing and has a few scenes with his brothers and sisters. And it's supposed to make us feel more for the Greens. Now, everything that I've just said about episode 1 and 2 is nonsense. Take it with a grain of salt. Nothing is confirmed until it airs on our screens. Although some of the things that I said were confirmed through filming, right? But just remember, anything can happen. Take this with a grain of salt. But one thing is for certain, Claire Kilner will be directing episode 2. I know this for a fact because she told me. She told me through the DMs on Instagram, and I was the first person that got the privilege to announce such news, right? Now, there are other directors. Obviously, Geeta Patel is going to be returning for Season 2, but for the most part, we don't have 100% certainty on who the other episodes are and what episodes they're going to be directing, at least for me, because I literally heard it from Claire's mouth saying, yeah, I'm doing episode 2 and episode 5. So, yeah, and there was articles that came out that said Geeta was going to be returning because Catherine... CGOP is her username on Instagram. She's the director of photography for House of the Dragon. She mentioned that Geeta Patel is going to be returning as well. Right? So let me reiterate those two things because I talked a lot in between. In episode 1, Rhaenyra will fly to Shipbreaker Bay and mourn Luke. Supposedly, also in this episode, we're going to get the repercussions for what happens on the Greens and the Blacks. So there's going to be several scenes that jump back and forth between the Greens and the Blacks. Daemon will hatch a plan for Blood and Cheese, and he ends up leaving for Harrenhal midway through the episode. And then at the end of the episode, he takes Harrenhal and gets injured in the process. This injury will leave him left out for a few scenes, or for a few episodes. And I forgot to mention this. There was a audition for Alice Rivers that was public but has since been removed, where she's treating Daemon's injuries that he receives while taking Harrenhal. Now in the books, it's interesting. Daemon actually doesn't receive any injuries and doesn't kill anybody, because what he does is genius. He takes Caraxes and flies him to the top of the King's Tower, right? And then the Castellan, this older, strong uncle dude, ends up submitting, right? And Daemon takes Harrenhal with no bloodshed. And you got to realize, Harrenhal is a massive strategic point in the map of Westeros. It gives a place for all of Rhaenyra's bannermen in the Riverlands to rally to, because Harrenhal is the biggest castle, and yes, the Riverlands are ruled by House Tully and River Run. Speaking of which, River Run is amazing. I hope they do it justice on the TV show. It's got these this like maze of sluice gates that allows water to flow into one spot and completely cut off River Run on all sides. Like literally, it has a moat that covers the entirety, all four sides of River Run itself, so it's impossible to attack it strategically. You're gonna have to lay siege and wait it out, right? You can't mount an assault against something that has a moat on all four sides. It's amazing. I hope they do River Run justice. But anyway, that's what happens in the books. On the TV show, Daemon will supposedly take Harrenhal in episode 1. Then episode 2 starts with the intro to Blood and Cheese. Like Mysaria's like rallying them, going to go get Blood and Cheese. Most of the time is spent building up to the death of Jaehaerys. This person did mention that we're actually supposed to kind of like Blood and Cheese, and what they do is supposedly going to be an accident. And there were other rumors that were released online, right, that had mentioned a similar thing, and that was that Blood and Cheese is kind of an accident. My opinion, that makes the most like dramatic for a scene to watch on screen if it's something that's gone horribly wrong and that wasn't the initial plan. Maybe they initially meant to kidnap Jaehaerys and instead he's beheaded, right? So that's going to be terrible to watch. This person also mentions that we will see Jace arriving in the Vale, and we will also see Daeron the Daring, arriving to King's Landing. And Daeron has several scenes with Aegon, Aemon, and Helaena, and his mother Alicent, and also obviously Sir Otto. And his character is like the most innocent of all the Greens next to Helaena, so the writers made sure to include dialogue and scenes that make everybody love Daeron. And then in episode 3 starts out with the funeral of Jaehaerys, right? We've actually seen that confirmed. We've watched them film that. We have Alicent and Helaena traveling through the city on a funeral reign. Supposedly, Helaena tries to kill herself right after Blood and Cheese happens, but she's stopped by Criston Cole. And then also later on in the episode, Alicent at the Small Council supposedly will try to use the death of Jaehaerys as a way to turn. She mentions that we should explain this to the crowds, like, and try to turn the citizens of King's Landing against Rhaenyra, but that fails. And supposedly when she gives this speech, when Aegon gives the speech, but it's really through her, people yell out, "This is what happens when brothers lie with sisters," and then the crowd starts throwing things, and apparently someone yells out also, "They're an abomination, and the gods do not like that." Like I said, take this all with a grain of salt, but just realize that the citizens of King's Landing actually have done stuff like that, and they did do things like that in the A Song of Ice and Fire novels, to the point where you're like, oh crap, no one should be giving speeches in front of the King's Landing citizens. And maybe Daenerys did a good thing by burning the stench that is Flea Bottom. Just kidding. So yeah, episode 3 is going to be intense. And then episode 4 is kind of slower paced. These people mentioned that ravens will fly for Dragonstone from Rook's Rest. This is the episode where Jace will arrive in Winterfell, and ultimately at the end, Rook's Rest battle happens. Meleys and Rhaenys are killed. Initially, this was sent to me, I first mentioned this months ago. Initially, this person said that Rhaenys survives her fall to the ground. So basically, after the ravens arrive from Rook's Rest to Dragonstone, Rhaenyra sort of hesitates on sending anybody because she's constantly losing her children and she lost her father, right? All these things. So Rhaenys rather, steps up and says, let me go take care of this. When Rhaenys arrives there on back of Meleys, she realizes that it's a trap. Aegon and Sunfire there alongside Aemond and Vhagar. And instead of turning tail and running, which Meleys totally can, right? Rhaenys can control a dragon and leave, she gladly goes into the battle, knowing that it could potentially mean her death, right? So, Aegon and Sunfire Sunfire is a lot smaller than Melee's. And what ends up happening is Melee's crashes into Sunfire, in canon anyway, Melee's wraps her jaws around Sunfire's neck and closes, and Sunfire almost dies, and like he has one of his wings almost torn off. Like after this battle, he has to sit in the battlefield around Rook's Rest for several months, feasting off the corpses to sort of heal itself before it is even able to take flight again, right? So initially, it looks like Melee's is gonna win, but then Aemon and Vhagar show up, crashes into all of them, and sends them hurtling towards the earth. Aegon jumps off of his dragon, Sunfire, and breaks both of his legs, but he's got horrible burns that he takes. This is all in canon. He's got horrible burns that he takes on his arms and body, and the flames were so hot that his metal armor actually fuses to his skin. So he's never quite the same after this battle. It takes him a year to heal, and Aemon becomes Prince Regent after these events. According to a leaker, Rhaenys survives the fall, right, after crashing into the ground from that massive battle, and then she's eaten by Sunfire. Okay, so just picking things up a bit. In episode 5, Melee's head is marched through the streets of King's Landing. We know that for a fact because that was what was filmed. And also, this person mentions that dragon seeds are a massive part of this episode. Like, Aegon suffered wounds and is now bedridden, but one of the plots that will go alongside a lot of the green, heavily centered scenes will be the dragon seeds on Dragonstone, right? So Aemon starts to take power, and one of the first things he does is send Eric to kill Rhaenyra, right? So in the books, that idea is from Aegon, and I think Sir Otto, kind of, and this will apparently be one of the first things that Aemon does, and he does this without really anybody knowing about it. Episode 5, everything I just said about episode 5, likely fake, take it with a grain of salt, but one confirmed thing is that Melee's head will be shown at some point in the season, but also episode 5 is directed again by Claire Kilner, so she's doing episodes 2 and 5. And then in episode 6, the entire, for the most part, like I think this person says 37 minutes out of the episode is going to be focusing on the Cargill brothers. And then we're also going to get more dragon seeds, spending more time with those characters, which ones successfully mount their dragons. So episode 6 is going to be like a sort of featuring new characters that are going to play a more prominent role in the later seasons of the show, as opposed to the Cargill brothers, who have played a major role, Eric and Arik, in the series so far. Like this season 2, their scenes are going to be increased. I do want to say this: Luke and Elliot Tittenser follow me on Instagram. They often view my stories, and I often try to send them messages about smoking weed, because we all smoking weed up in there. So yeah, shout out to Elliot and Luke Tittenser. But yeah, so episode 6 will be the Duel of the Cargill brothers, and we'll get dragon seeds mounting their dragons. And then in episode 7, this is the second to last one of the season, so usually that means that episode 7 is like the best, right? So this person mentions that Daeron will become Daeron the Daring, so apparently we'll have Rook's Rest in the Battle of Honeywine. So in the Battle of Honeywine that happens in episode 7, this is where Daeron becomes the Darings. And then this is really interesting. Apparently Sir Eric of the Blacks, not Sir Arik of the Greens, but Sir Eric of the Blacks survives the duel with his brother, but it's like on his deathbed, and he supposedly has a scene with Rhaenyra, and it's really sentimental and heartfelt, and then she basically holds him as he takes his last breath, and then supposedly this moment is what gives her the courage to mount an assault on King's Landing. And then get this, episode 8, the taking of King's Landing. Rhaenyra attacks from above and flies into the Red Keep with Daemon, right? The Gold Cloaks mutiny and make several strikes against the remaining Hightower guards. Alicent is then imprisoned, and this is insane. Helaena jumps to her death, according to the leaks. Daemon will then have a fight with Rhaenyra and ends up leaving the Red Keep. On his way out, or he just sort of like, in another scene after the argument with Rhaenyra, this is where he starts getting close with Nettles. Supposedly they share a few scenes, and Nettles ends up departing with Daemon, and supposedly they travel back to Harrenhal, or just depart from the city. And then the last 20 minutes of this episode are Rhaenyra beginning to rule. Jace supposedly arrives back from the north and informs his mother of Cregan's pledge. And then in the last few seconds of the episode, the cliffhanger, is the setup for the Battle of the Gullet, because Corlys comes in and informs Rhaenyra right after Jace has that scene with her about telling her about Cregan and Winterfell. Corlys supposedly comes in and informs them that the Triarchy is now coming in to the Gullet, and they're going to have to go and fight them at sea. And this is how the season ends. The screen on the episode fades to black, and then we cut back to Aegon, who's now able to limp, and he's making his way through the tunnels under the Red Keep, and he's being led by, get this, Footman himself, Larys. Okay, so I have included my thoughts along the way while reiterating this plotline, so let me just run through it. In episode 1, Rhaenyra will fly to Shipbreaker Bay and mourn Luke. The episode will show the process of the repercussions of what happens after the death of Luke from the Blacks and the Greens perspective. So it's going to be, episode 1 is going to jump back and forth a lot between Dragonstone and Harrenhal. In this episode, Daemon hatches a plan and leaves for Harrenhal, King's Landing and Dragonstone. The camera scenes will jump back and forth between those two major bases of operations for the Greens and the Blacks. And then in this episode, Daemon hatches a plan for Blood and Cheese, and then he ends up leaving for Harrenhal at the end of the episode, takes the castle, but is injured. The injury leaves him out for a few episodes. Then in episode 2, starts with introduction to the characters Blood and Cheese via Mysaria. Most of the time is spent building up those two characters. They are supposed to have a few funny scenes that makes the audience like them. We catch a glimpse of Jace arriving in the Vale, and Daeron arrives to King's Landing. And then in episode 3, obviously in episode 2, Blood and Cheese happens. And then in episode 3, we have the funeral of Jaehaerys, with Alicent and Helaena traveling through the city on a funeral wain. We watch that being filmed. And then supposedly Helaena tries to kill herself. This is before the funeral procession with Alicent, and when they're out on the wagon traveling with Jaehaerys' body. Supposedly right after Blood and Cheese happens, Helaena tries to kill herself, but Cole is there and stops her. And then after the scene of them marching through the streets, Alicent supposedly uses the death of Jaehaerys as a way to try to turn the crowns against Rhaenyra, but fails. Someone yells out, "This is what happens when brothers lie with sisters," and another person says, "They're an abomination." And they start throwing stuff at Aegon. And then in episode 4, ravens fly for Dragonstone from Rook's Rest. Rook's Rest actually happens in this episode, and to juxtapose the battle, Jace will be arriving in Winterfell. And then Meleys and Rhaenys are ultimately killed. Meleys is beheaded, and Rhaenys is supposedly eaten by Sunfire. Then in episode 5, the start of it will be Meleys' head being marched through the streets of King's Landing. And then in episode 5, the dragon seeds become a major plot point of the episode. It's shown how Aegon suffered massive wounds and is now bedridden, and Alicent informs Aemon he's to take power and become Prince Regent. And the first thing Aemon does is send Arik to go and kill Rhaenyra in place, pretending to be his brother Eric. And then in episode 6, most of it is the duel of the Cargill brothers juxtaposed with more dragon seeds, with more dragon seeds plot. Basically this is them mounting their dragons, and in episode 5 it's their introduction. In episode 7, we have the Battle of Honeywine, where Daeron becomes the Daring, and Daemon rallies his forces in Harrenhal, so Daemon's fully healed from his injury. Sir Eric, who survived the battle with his brother Sir Arik, is clinging on to life, and then has a really sentimental, heartfelt scene with Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra holds him as he takes his last dying breath, and this gives her the courage to go and take King's Landing. And then episode 8, Rhaenyra actually takes King's Landing. Rhaenyra and Daemon attack from above and fly directly into the Red Keep, right? And then the Gold Cloaks mutiny, because they've been on Daemon's side the whole time, and make several strikes against the remaining Hightower guards that are in King's Landing. Alicent is imprisoned, and they try to imprison Helaena as well, but she ends up jumping to her death, which is nuts. If true, obviously. She will. Helaena does die. She jumps to her death and dies on the spikes outside the moat that surrounds Maegor's Holdfast, which is a castle inside the Red Keep. So the Red Keep is a castle. Maegor's Holdfast is a castle inside of that can fully be like you can if someone's trying to attack you, you can go in there and back it up because it's got a dry moat all the way around it with spiked swords, so you cannot mount an assault against it. So you have to lay siege. Supposedly Helena jumps to her death. Also, Daemon and Rhaenyra fight. He ends up storming out, and he ends up leaving King's Landing altogether with Nettles. But I'm assuming they return because at the very end of the episode, after Rhaenyra starts to rule, Jace arrives back from the north and informs her of Cregan's pledge, and then Corlys comes in and tells her the Battle of the Gullet is about to happen because the Triarchy forces are attacking his ships that he laid annex to. So this is the battle where Jace dies. Nettle takes place in this, plays a part in this battle, so her and Daemon probably don't get very far. They probably turn right back around. And that's not exactly the way that it goes down in the books. But besides that, I want you all to let me know what you think of this plot outline for House of the Dragon Season 2. Thank you all so much for watching, and please consider checking out my Patreon over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. And also, thank you for watching. Slap a like on this video if you want. Like goes 1B420.